Hi there, Jason Mertz here. I am super excited to take you through my project today. It's a project that involves Bedrock LLMs from Amazon cloud-based services, and integration between different platforms. So what is this project? This project involves finding clippings of a job, comparing it to your resume, and quickly getting a response on how qualified you are for that job in a matter of seconds. So hang in there. I'm going to show you how it works, and it will be much easier once I show a demonstration.
So the first thing you're going to want to do is go to a job board like LinkedIn, find a job that you think matches with your resume or your skills and qualifications. Make sure it's got a job description. And what you're going to do is click on this pair of scissors that is up here on the right. We're going to click on manual selection. Then you can see the hash marks are jumping all over the place. What I want to do is make sure they're up and down this column. Okay, click on that, and then at the top you'll see this capture the entire job posting along with the company. What I want to do next is I want to keep machine learning, so that's the job title, and I want to put in there it's from Zillow. Then I'm going to click on save content. Then this is going to kick off a process that I'll explain at some other point. So I just got an email from AWS through my Gmail verified account. I'm going to click on the email and walk you through what that is. So I'm not going to go in details about everything that's in this email. I want to just explain how this is set up. So the first thing is it tells me what percent of match I am to this job, and it's for record purposes. So I've got the title of the job that I applied for or want to apply for and the company that it's with. At the top part, it has the job skills and experience that match are a good match for me on my resume. Then it's got gaps in the posting versus my resume. And then it's got an overall summary at the end on generally how I align on skills and experience. Then we get into execution time. So this process took 17 seconds to run. And then I've got documentation on all the particulars of the job. So everything we captured there with that screen capture is down here. So now I have a record of this that I can look back on and see all of the requirements for the job. So the next thing we're going to do is walk through the diagram on the screen. So as a user, you're going to be doing two things here. Number one, you're going to be storing your resume on S3. Number two, you're going to be interacting with Chrome and Web Clipper. As I mentioned earlier, Web Clipper is a service that can take text and push it to different places like GitLab or GitHub. In this case, we're using GitHub, and GitHub has the unique ability to know when things are posted there and push it to different places like API gateways. API gateways are then used interchangeably with Lambda. So Lambda is Python code basically that is written to interact with the S3 bucket, interact with Bedrock LLMs, and email simple services with AWS. I also want to mention that I do have a detailed step-by-step guide on how to do this project yourself with some starter code and everything that is involved with this project. So I will definitely leave a link in the description below. So the next things we're going to do here is cover some of the more technical aspects of this project. I assume you already have a current resume, an AWS account, you have a Chrome browser, you have a Web Clipper installed as an extension in Chrome, and finally a GitHub account. So now I'm going to go over some of the more technical aspects of the project. I'm going to start with GitHub. So GitHub's a repository that I created for this project. A couple of key things in here is, first of all, the project is called Job Postings here. Under the repository, I have a couple of key folders, clippings and GitHub workflows. So under clippings, that's where all the clippings go for the job postings. So when you clip something on the web snipping tool, it goes to this clippings folder as a markdown file. Okay. This folder up here contains the YAML file that will orchestrate the run over to AWS Gateway. And I've got that code in the Medium article, so if you want to check that out, you can. But I wanted to explain what that is. A couple more things on this repository is make sure that you have this a kind of private thing. So you probably don't want the world seeing every job that you're applying for or you're looking through. So just make sure that it says private or you create a private repository. And in that private repository, what you're going to do, what you have to do is create a GitHub token, okay, that you're going to give to the web snipping tool. And to do that, you're going to come over here to your profile. You're going to go to settings. Then you scroll all the way to the bottom to where it says developer settings. Then you get this personal access tokens. There's a couple different options. I chose the fine grain tokens, which is has the ability to go very specifically into only a single repository. And that's important because the web clipping tool will only have access to this repository, will not have access to the entire, all of your different projects. So I like that it's project driven. And if you click on that, also in the Medium article, I do have all the permissioning that's behind here. I had to experiment with what worked and what didn't. But this is where I generated my token. Once you generate a token, you're going to save it. You're going to use that in the web clipping tool to be able to interact with this repository. So now that we have our token, we're going to go back into settings. Go back into our repo. Now we're going to look at that YAML file. So a few things about the YAML file. Okay, so this is looking for the latest file in clippings. Everything in clippings are markdown files. So the markdown file will go to S3, or sorry, go to AWS via the API gateway. Okay, so you're going to have to configure this for your own needs, but basically you're going to store your API key, which I'll get into in a little bit, but I chose to lock down my API, so not everybody else can hit that. It's only this service can do that, only with the key that I generated for this service. So again, just customize this to your needs. But basically what happens is when something goes into that clippings folder, this is generated and creates a run job for GitHub. And if I want to see the run job, I can go up here to actions. And the last example we did for Zillow is going to be here. That's the latest one. And I can see every step of this. So it sets up the job and it runs very quickly. So latency is not a huge issue here. So these are the files that is sent to AWS as a markdown. So one thing I want to mention in regards to the API key we saw earlier, I'm going to go back to that into my YAML file. So I mentioned to store your API key, but where do you store it? So let me show you quickly where to do that. So if you go to settings under your under your project, right? Go into secrets and variables and actions. Then this is where you can create a new key that you're going to get from AWS, and that's what you're going to pass into it. So now we're going to go into Web Clipper, and I'm going to show you how this links back to GitHub.
So if you click on the scissors, this is pretty simple, so I'm going to keep this brief, but all you got to do is bind this to your GitHub account. So we're going to click on mine real quick and edit this. I've got my Get access token. It's private. It's got a save path and a repository name. That's it. When you use it for the first time, you're going to have to use this little drop down arrow and then select the project, and then it will appear each time as you're using the tool.
So we're going to click on or find Amazon Bedrock. It's right here. Click on Get Started. And if you haven't been in here before, it's only in a few regions. It's not in every region. I am in North Virginia. It's closest to my house. Now, a few options here. The Overview tab will talk about different models that's offered, and you could explore each model as you see fit for your use case. But the interesting thing about this, where we're at now, is that you can find an area where you can test models and with real scenarios and see what parameters work the best. So one thing I found helpful is at the bottom where you see model access. If you click on that, you're going to see all the models that AWS currently offers on this platform. So you could see that I have access to Titan and Claude Instant. Claude Instant is the one we're using for this project. And I have access to Llama 2, 7 billion parameters, and Mistral. So Mistral is also a good one. How to get access. So up here on the right, it says Manage Model Access. And if I click on, like say this Jurassic one, and I want access to that one, I would scroll down the bottom and click Save Changes, and that initiates a process through AWS to give you access for that particular model. Like I said, I did this for most of these. When you're getting to this model, this Claude, you're going to have a use case for AWS. My use case was that I'm looking at experimenting with this model. So I want to show you the best part of this tool. So if you click on chat, I can compare different model outputs. So in this use case, I have a resume, I have job posting. Now I'm trying to figure out which model is going to give me results that I can work with. So I'm going to select the model. I'm going to select my Claude Instant 2, 1.2. And I'm also going to compare models. I see that I can choose one from Meta, Llama 2 with 7 billion parameters. Now I have a prompt that I'm going to ask both models, and I'm going to see what comes out of this. So in the next tab over, I've already done this. I've put in my resume. I'll just show you really quickly. Put in my resume, then I put in the job posting, and then I asked both models the same question. So in Claude Instant, I got some summary, a comparison between the resume and the posting. In the Claude Instant on the left, it seems that it compared correctly my resume with the job posting. On the right, with Llama 2, all it asked me is, do you have experience in any of this stuff? And that's not exactly what I'm looking for. So you can see how valuable this is, looking at your use case, comparing different models, the output with the same question. I want to take a minute to talk about the configurations on the model. Here I'm in the chat section. I selected the Claude Instant, but if you're in other models, you'll see some different options depending on what model you choose. The main thing is random and diversity here is specific to Claude, whereas a lot of the more popular common models have something called temperature. They do basically the same thing. At the low end, that's deterministic and the most common responses the model is going to give you. At the high end, it's going to be words that may not be as common are available for the model to pick as the next word. Next two measures are top P and top K, and similar, this is the cumulative distribution of the next word in the sentence. I'm going to give an example to help shore this up. If I have a model and the sentence is, I want a peanut butter and blank sandwich, the model will pick from the most common responses what the blank should be. So say peanut butter is 70% and you have honey at 15%. Top P will add up the probability of peanut butter and honey, and the percentage here is, if I have this at like say 85%, it will choose either peanut butter or jelly as the next word of the sentence. If it's lower, it's only going to pick peanut butter each time. So that's the way that one works. Top K is simply just the number of words that it's allowed to pick from on any particular next word in the sentence. So the last thing is maximum length, and maximum length is basically the number of words that come out of the model that get printed. Um, in this example of resume versus job posting, it's important to have enough words that come out of the model printed so that you know what's going on. So this is just a way to limit that and control costs basically too, because you're only paying for the tokens that come out of the model. And if you're limiting this here, then you're limiting the cost overall of what you get. So the last two things in AWS that I want to cover here is Lambda and API Gateway. So if you create a new Lambda function and you get to this point, I added a gateway after the Lambda function was created, okay? And we're going to go through this code and understand what's happening here. Then you can implement this on your own and obviously change things as it suits you. So under code, we're going to make this bigger. What's happening is the Lambda function is getting something from the API gateway. The API gateway gets something in an event, so in a payload in this example. So the GitHub repository sends something over to Lambda. So the GitHub repository sends something over to the API gateway, and the API gateway then has this event. So the event is passed into Lambda, and this is really just Python code handling whatever comes in that event. So I have a start timer here just to initiate how long this job takes. Usually it's between 15 and 30 seconds. Then we have the model specifics, so what model is it part of? And I got this from all the documentation that's out there for the model, so it's something you could look up if you want to use a different model. Also, interact with the model is pretty standard. These are just templates or functions where you can pass in very specifically questions to the model and get out responses from the model. So I'm going to scroll down here a little bit more. Initial prompt. And so this is why what I'm telling the model is read the following job description and respond with only the job title. Now, this took some trial and error because this didn't necessarily work that way. The model, no matter how I changed this, didn't respond with just the job title. Okay, so that's something you're going to have to understand is these models are trained a certain way to respond a certain way, and they're not always going to give you exactly what you're looking for. So in trial and error, I found exactly how this was printed out, and it basically gave me a sentence, a hyphen, and then it gave me the title of the job. So I just used a Python script here to just split that out so that I can find the title of the job. And also in this case, the model is estimating what the job title is. There's no hard coding job titles. So you may get something that's not quite right when you look at a job title here. It's usually right, but I did this so that You don't necessarily have to type in the job title and company. It's a best practice, yes, but the model should be able to figure out what job you're going for from the text that you clip. So same with the firm. Firm name was actually pretty easy. Found it pretty easy. The next prompt is saying, I want to compare my job posting to my resume. My resume is here, and here's my job posting. Here's a job posting. And then I want two sections, skills and experience that match, and number two, gaps in my resume. So that's really all I want from the model, and I want that printed out in an email. So the email comes a little bit later, um, but the pattern and the matches here. These, I'm looking for an overall percentage of what match I am to that posting. It's not always going to give me a percentage. Sometimes it gave me like 80%. Sometimes it gave me a range of 60 to 70%. This function is looking for the top percentage out of that string. And I'm just creating some variables here. So highest percentage, the email should contain the job posting, it should contain the percent match and the firm that it's at. Then we have all the specifics of the email. So I'm not going to go into every single piece here, but just know that the relevant pieces here are the job posting, the percent match, and those strengths and opportunities in your background so that you can review that at some other point. So there are a few other things that I want to go over on the Lambda. So I'm going to make this a bit smaller. And we're going to go to some of these settings on the top. So we have code, test, monitor, configuration, alias, and versions. Okay. So test, I already have a test that was configured. And this is actually hitting that Lambda expression and querying the model. So this probably will take 15 seconds or so, and I'll show you what that looks like. So it says it's successful. What was the test? We're going to go in here and configure the test. So your default, you'll have to change. So the body here, this is a job posting, and it's comparing it to my resume. Okay. So the next thing I want to mention is because this took 15 seconds, that means you're going to have to expand the Lambda time that it takes. I think a default is 3 seconds, and that has to be bumped up to at least, I put it up to 30 seconds, but I think it can go up to 3 minutes. So that's under configuration. General configuration, you see timeout is 30 seconds. Default's 3, so if you don't change that, this is not going to work for you. Okay, so for the next thing we're going to talk about is this API gateway. So again, we're in our Lambda function, and the Lambda function is going to have an event in there, right? So all the API gateway is the event, and we're defining how that event is structured so that Lambda can deal with it. Okay. So first thing we're going to do is add a trigger. Select a source, API gateway, create a new API gateway. I did a REST API, and also for security purposes, I did a API key. Click add. And what this does is it creates security level between this API gateway and Lambda, so you don't have to create that somewhere else down the road. So the one we just created is here. This is the previous one I had. So if I click on this, the first thing that opens up is this hierarchy, right, under resources. I don't like the way Lambda renamed this. I wanted to rename this to something different, but I'm going to show you exactly what we need to do here. You're going to select this. We're going to delete that. And we're going to create a resource, okay? Our resource is going to be called get payload. Under get payload, we need to add a method. And I know looking at the documentation in GitHub, I need a post method. So I'm going to select the post method. And again, this is tied to our Lambda function. We need to choose the Lambda function here, this one. The only other thing you have to do here is go down to request body, and we have to configure this how the data is going to be coming in to this API gateway. So this is going to be a text or markdown. Click on create method. So now we have everything set up to where this can accept that payload from Git. So the last thing to do is to deploy the API. So if we click on deploy API, you'll get what stage do you want it in. So the way this is designed is if you have like a pre-prod environment and a prod environment, you can deploy it to pre-prod and test it. But since we don't have all these different environments, the only thing I need to do is put it into a default stage. So default is an option there. And once you hit deploy, it makes it available with all the permissioning that you've enabled. The invoke URL is something that you would use in GitHub. So you'd copy this, go back to GitHub, and then use that in your code. Congratulations for making it this far. There is only one last step to do, and that's to deploy the Lambda function. If you haven't already, this is where you can, on your Lambda, and you also have to deploy your Lambda before a test, but in any case, just to show that, if I type in test under my markdown here, I can click deploy, and this is ready to go. So everything's in place here to receive that load from Git. So just wanted to thank you again for going through this with me. I appreciate it. I want to wish you the best of luck on your own project.